I was at my niece's wedding when my phone buzzed. A message lit the screen. 5 words that knocked the air out of my lungs. Don't trust the groom. For half a heartbeat, I thought it was a tasteless joke, until I looked up and saw the fear. She was trying to hide behind the veil. Sophie stood at the far end of the aisle, bouquet trembling just enough for anyone who loved her to notice. Everyone else saw lace and flowers and a photographer's flash. I saw a girl who had learned too young how to smile through a storm. My name is Thomas Rourke. I'm the man who taught Sophie to ride a bike, who patched skinned knees and fixed leaky sinks. And 3 months ago, when a drunk driver took my sister Laura and her husband Michael, I became the closest thing she had to a parent. I wasn't the one who chose her dress or tasted the cake or toured the venue. That was supposed. To be her mother, I'm just the guy who caught the bouquet when it slipped, who signs forms now and answers late-night calls because someone has to. I stared at the text. Unknown number. No follow-up, no context. Just the kind of warning that can blow a family. A string quartet sawed through Pachelbel. The room smelled like eucalyptus and candle wax. The event planner floated by with a clipboard and a smile that meant invoices were paid on time. To my left, my aunt whispered that Sophie looked like an angel. To my right, 2 groomsmen were joking too loudly, nerves disguised as laughter. I should have slipped my phone back into my pocket and let the music carry me. Instead, I scanned the faces, bridesmaids in soft green, old friends from school, neighbors who still brought casseroles when it rained. Somewhere in that sea of satin and suits was a person who knew something I didn't. At the front of the hall, the officiant cleared his throat. The doors at the rear swung wider. Adrian Cross stepped into the light with a smile that photographed, well, he had the posture of a man used to being looked at and the eyes of a man used to getting away with it. Handsome, buttoned, perfectly composed. My phone vibrated again, this time just a phantom buzz from my own pulse. I locked the screen and made myself breathe. Suspicion can be a parasite. Once it hooks in, it eats every good thing first. Maybe grief was making me paranoid. Maybe the warning belonged to someone else. Maybe the world wasn't always a trap. Sophie met my eyes as the music swelled. It was only a second, the kind of glance lost unless you're watching for it. Fear. Not the stage fright sort. Not the I hope I don't trip sort. This was a caged animal flicker, quick and thin and real. I slid the phone into my jacket and stepped 1 pace out of the aisle so she'd see me. Just me. I nodded, slow and sure. I'm here. If you need me, I'm here. The ceremony began its soft theater. Welcome, gratitude, a joke about meeting on a rainy Tuesday. I watched Adrian more than I should have. He laughed at the right places, squeezed Sophie's fingers at the right beats, dabbed at the corner of his eye when her cousin sang the hymn Laura loved. Perfection can be a costume. The trick is spotting the seam. Who sent the message? I cataloged possibilities the way I learned to at construction sites. Measure twice, cut once, leave room for the wood to breathe. Could it be a jealous ex? A bridesmaid? Who knows more than she can say? A vendor who overheard something ugly? Or someone from Adrian's past walking the room like a ghost with unfinished business? When the readers took their turn, I slipped to the back row under the pretense of fetching water. From there I could see the whole chessboard, the open service door behind a curtain, a caterer hustling trays, the wedding planner whispering into a headset, a man in a charcoal suit I didn't recognize, standing just inside the threshold where staff came and went. He wasn't watching the ceremony, he was watching Adrian. The text burned in my pocket. Don't trust the groom. I thought of Laura the last time we spoke about the wedding, before the accident. She'd said, "He's charming. Tommy, I just wish I knew him better." At the time, it sounded like a mother's caution. Today, it felt like a warning I'd been too polite to hear. The vows began. Sophie's voice was steady, then wavered, then steadied again like a tightrope walker finding the line. "I promise to choose you," she said, and the room sighed as, when it was Adrian's turn, he smiled at her with that measured tenderness men practice in mirrors. "You are my home," he said, polished, symmetrical, memorized. I wanted to believe him, God, I wanted to. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and the hall erupted, relief untying shoulders, applause crashing like surf. I clapped with everyone else and planted my feet on the floor because that's what you do when the world is slippery. You find something solid and hold. The reception moved like clockwork. Speeches, first dance, the clink of glassware and the champagne. Hush of congratulations. I drifted table to table, collecting hugs that smelled like perfume and old cologne, deflecting condolences with the skill I'd learned at gravesides. People said, your sister would be so proud, and you've been a rock, and it's good to see you smile. I smiled like it was my job. From across the room, Adrian charmed his way through a cluster of out-of-town friends, hand at the small of Sophie's back, like he owned the air she breathed. Every so often his gaze skittered to the edges of the room, to doorways and shadows, to places a man looks if he's waiting for something he doesn't want on camera. I took my water and found a slice of wall where the uplights painted everything gold. The charcoal suit stranger had moved closer to the service door, speaking low to someone I couldn't see. He wore the unremarkable expression of men hired to be unremarkable. Uncle Tom, the nickname only Sophie used. She stood beside me, dress rustling like leaves, the scent of peonies and something borrowed. You look like your mother, I said, and the truth of it cut me open and stitched me together in the same breath. Her eyes shone. Is this okay? The question swelled with 100 others. Are we doing the right thing? Are you really okay? Can you be my father and my friend and my compass all at once? It can be, I said. If you want it to be. She nodded, small and quick, grateful for an answer that wasn't a lecture. Then Adrian touched her elbow and she flinched, a flicker so fast I almost told myself I imagined it. He kissed her temple and led her back into the orbit of congratulations, and the room absorbed them like sugar and heat. I checked my phone again, hoping for context, for a second sentence, for anything. The message thread stared back with its blank, accusatory single line. I typed, "Who is this?" then erased it. If you answer a door, you can't pretend you didn't hear the knock. The band pivoted to a Motown set. Older relatives woke up. Younger ones filmed everything like it might vanish if they didn't. From the dais, Adrian raised a glass to offer a toast. The photographer crouched to catch his good side. He waited for the last few conversations to hush, chin up, smile calibrated. Across the room, the man in the charcoal suit shifted his weight, barely a ripple in the crowd. His eyes never left the groom. Family, Adrian began, voice warm enough to melt ice. Friends, tonight is... My phone buzzed again. This time there was a second line. If you love her, don't let him finish. The second message sat on my screen like a live wire. If you love her, don't let him finish. For a second I thought the world had slowed down, the music, the chatter, even the flicker of candlelight seemed to stretch. My niece Sophie was seated, beside Adrian at the head table, her smile polite but brittle, her fingers twisting the stem of her glass until I worried it might snap. Adrian raised his champagne flute higher, waiting for the last whisper to die. Tonight is proof, he said, his voice cutting across the hall with practiced warmth, that love conquers loss, that family endures, and that Sophie, he paused, turned to her with a softness so convincing it almost fooled me. Almost. Sophie is the answer to every prayer I never knew how to pray. Applause burst like fireworks, the kind that leave smoke long after the sparkle. Sophie's shoulders stiffened, and when she clinked glasses with him, her eyes darted toward me for a heartbeat, like she knew I'd seen something she couldn't say. My phone felt like an anchor in my hand. Someone in this room wanted me to stop him. Someone thought Adrian finishing that toast meant disaster. But how? Why? I slipped outside into the corridor, away from the golden lights and champagne haze. My pulse was a drum in my ears. I dialed. The one man I trusted. Uncle Hank, I whispered when he answered. Tom? His gravelly voice was the same as when I was 10 and in trouble. What's wrong? I explained quickly. The first text, the second one, the look in Sophie's eyes. He was silent for a long moment. Then, keep your head down. Don't make a scene. Whoever's sending those messages might be a friend. Or they might want you. To panic, forward me the texts. I did, thumb trembling. You think this is about money, about the estate? Could be, he said. Could be worse. Listen, stay close to Sophie, watch Adrian, and don't let anyone box you in. I'll make a few calls. I pocketed the phone and returned to the reception, just as the band struck up a Sinatra ballad. Couples swayed on the parquet floor, sequins and satin shimmering under the chandeliers. Adrian had Sophie in his arms, twirling her with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing everyone's watching. His hand rested too tight at her waist. She smiled for the crowd, but her lips barely moved. That's when I saw him again. The man in the charcoal suit posted near the side door, scanning the room like he was inventorying exits. He wasn't dancing, wasn't drinking, just watching. Adrian, and maybe me. I moved toward him, weaving through the crowd of cousins and co-workers, but just as I neared, a voice stopped me. Thomas? It was Ethan Hale, my oldest friend. We hadn't spoken much since Laura's funeral, grief carving its own silence between us. His tie was loosened, his glass half full, but his eyes were sharp. You look like you're hunting someone, he said. Maybe I am. I gave him the shortest version possible. The texts, the warning, the man by the door. Ethan's face hardened. I've seen that guy. He was at the bar earlier, didn't order a drink. Just sat there watching. Before I could respond, Ethan touched my shoulder. Let me keep an eye on him. You stay with Sophie. I hesitated. Ethan had always been the one with fists faster than sense, but tonight I was grateful. I nodded. Careful. He smirked. When have I ever been careful? Then he slipped toward the shadows. Back at the head table, Adrian had abandoned the dance floor for a microphone. He was spinning a story about how he and Sophie first met, something about fate and late trains. The crowd laughed, charmed, but Sophie kept her eyes on the floor. My phone buzzed again. Check his pocket, left side, do it before midnight. I looked up. Adrian's left hand brushed against his suit jacket, the fabric sagging slightly where something weighted the pocket. My throat dried. Was it a weapon? A document? Proof of something darker? I leaned closer to Sophie during the next lull. You okay? I asked softly. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. He's perfect, she said for the room, but under her breath, almost inaudible. Don't let him fool you. The words knifed through me. Across the hall, Ethan moved like a shadow, tracking the man in the charcoal suit. I could see it in Ethan's stance. He was ready for trouble. Adrian lifted his glass again, eyes gleaming. To family, he said, and to a future no one can take from us. The crowd cheered, but my blood ran cold. Because in that moment, I understood. This wasn't just about Sophie's happiness. This was about something bigger, property, inheritance, power. And Adrian wasn't celebrating. He was claiming victory. I stepped forward, intending to intercept Sophie as she moved back toward the dance floor. But before I could, Ethan crashed into the table beside me, sending glasses shattering across the floor. He grabbed my arm, his voice hoarse with urgency. Tom, he's armed. The music screeched to a halt, screams rippling through the hall as people turned toward us. Sophie froze, bouquet slipping from her hand. Adrian's smile faltered, his left hand still inside his jacket pocket. And in that suspended second, I realized the texts weren't warnings anymore. They were instructions. Adrian had something in that pocket, and I was standing too far away to stop him before he pulled it out. Chairs screeched against the parquet floor as guests scrambled away from the head table. Champagne flutes toppled, their bubbles hissing against the cloth like sparks on a fuse. Sophie clutched her dress, eyes wide, torn between bolting for the door and standing her ground. And Adrian? Adrian just stood there, calm, smiling faintly, like the chaos around him was part of his script. His left hand still lingered at his pocket, knuckles taut under the white fabric of his shirt. "Adrian," I said, my voice low but sharp enough to cut through the noise. "Whatever's in your pocket, take it out slowly." The room hushed. Even the band stopped mid-chord. Adrian chuckled, shaking his head as though I were a child making a scene. "Thomas," he said, honey dripping from his tone, "you've had too much to drink. Why would I carry anything but vows on a night like this?" But his eyes, they weren't the eyes of a man humiliated. They were calculating, measuring exits, weighing how much longer he could keep the crowd under his charm. Ethan planted himself at my side, fists clenched. "He's lying," he muttered. I saw the outline, it's metal. Adrian raised his glass. "Let's not ruin Sophie's night with theatrics. We're family now." That word, family, burned like acid. He wanted the estate. He wanted the Rourke legacy that Sophie had inherited too soon, after her parents' deaths. To him, marriage was a contract of acquisition. The man in the charcoal suit moved closer to the stage. My gut told me he wasn't a guest at all. Ethan noticed too, shifting his stance. Before things could tip further, Sophie spoke. Her voice wavered, but it was strong enough to reach us all. "Adrian," she said, "show them. Whatever you're hiding, show them." The room held its breath. For the first time, Adrian's mask slipped. Just a crack, but enough. His jaw tightened. His hand twitched. Then, with exaggerated calm, he pulled the object from his pocket. A slim black notebook. Gasps rippled through the crowd. He opened it with a flourish, revealing page after page of neat handwriting. "My vows," he announced smoothly. "Drafts, revisions, evidence of a nervous groom, not a criminal." Laughter bubbled awkwardly around the hall, relieved and uneasy all at once. Someone even clapped, but Sophie didn't laugh. Her shoulders sagged with something worse than fear, disappointment. She looked at me, silently asking if I still believed what I'd seen. I did. Because the way Adrian slipped the notebook back into his pocket was too careful, too practiced, like a magician tucking away the real trick. Ethan leaned close. "He's covering, I swear it." I nodded. "Then we'll make him prove it." The rest of the evening limped on, brittle and strained. The band resumed playing, but every note felt like glass. Guests danced, but their laughter was jagged, nervous. Sophie stayed at Adrian's side, her smile stretched thin, while he whispered into her ear with a hand too firm on her arm. I tried to approach her once, but Evelyn, my sister-in-law, slipped between us like a blade. "Thomas," she said with icy sweetness, "you've disrupted enough tonight. Let Sophie enjoy her wedding without your suspicions." Suspicion? No. By then, it was conviction. Later, when the cake had been cut and the bouquet tossed, I slipped out to the courtyard for air. The night was thick with summer heat, cicadas buzzing like static. Ethan joined me, his tie undone, sweat glistening on his brow. "He's playing everyone," Ethan said. "But you saw Sophie's face. She knows. She just doesn't know how. To get out." I rubbed my temples, the words from the mysterious text replaying in my head. "Don't trust the groom. If you love her, don't let him finish. Check his pocket, left side." Whoever was sending them wasn't just warning me. They were orchestrating moves, nudging me like a pawn on a board. Could it be Sophie herself? I asked. Ethan shook his head. She was on stage with him. No way she sent those messages without him noticing. "Then who?" I whispered. That's when my phone buzzed again. Another message. "He has more than a notebook. Follow the man in, the charcoal suit. He knows where the real proof is." My chest tightened. The suit, the shadow near the door, the watcher who never danced. Ethan read over my shoulder. "We tail him," he said. "Now." We slipped back inside, blending with the thinning crowd. The man in the charcoal suit exited through the service door. Ethan and I followed into the narrow alley behind the venue, the air sharp with garbage, and smoke from the kitchen vents. The man lit a cigarette, checked his watch, and glanced over his shoulder. His movements were too alert, too disciplined. He wasn't just a hired hand, he was a professional. Ethan whispered, "What's the play?" I swallowed hard. We corner him. Find out what he knows. But before we could move, headlights flared at the alley's mouth. A black sedan rolled in slow, tires crunching gravel. The man in the suit flicked his cigarette aside and climbed into the back seat. The car door slammed, then it sped off, taillights vanishing into the dark. Ethan cursed. "We lost him." "No," I said, staring at the glow of my phone screen as another message appeared. "You're closer than you think, but time is running out." The words pulsed against the dark, and I realized with a chill what they really meant. The wedding wasn't just Sophie's new beginning. It was a deadline. And if I didn't unravel Adrian's plan before midnight, the next toast might not end with champagne. By the time I re-entered the ballroom, the atmosphere had shifted. The air was heavy with perfume and sweat, the kind of staleness that follows too much forced laughter. Sophie sat at the head table, her bouquet discarded beside a half-empty glass of wine. Adrian leaned close, whispering into her ear, his smile too perfect, too rehearsed. I watched the way her shoulders stiffened, how she nodded without conviction. She looked less like a bride and more like a hostage in white lace. Ethan nudged me. "He's tightening the noose," he murmured. I believed him. Because in the corner of the room, Evelyn and Richard, my late brother's in-laws, now Sophie's guardians in name only, watched the scene with expressions of cold satisfaction. They weren't celebrating Sophie's happiness. They were celebrating leverage. When Adrian finally stood, glass raised, his voice boomed through the hall. "To Sophie," he declared. "To family, to legacy, to a future none of us could dream without her." Legacy. That word landed like a stone in my gut. He wasn't talking about love. He was talking about inheritance. As the toast ended and applause rose, Sophie's eyes flicked toward me, just for an instant. But it was enough. Fear, plea, a silent scream that said, "Help me." I slipped out before dessert was served, Ethan close on my heels. The service hallway smelled of spilled beer and bleach. My phone buzzed again, another anonymous text. "Check the study in Evelyn's house. That's where he hides the contracts." I showed Ethan. His jaw tightened. "Then that's our next move." But before we could plan, a voice cut through the dim hallway. Evelyn's. "Thomas." She emerged from the shadows, Richard at her side. Her smile was sugar, her eyes knives. "Sneaking off already? You've always had a problem with loyalty." Richard added, "You've been meddling all evening. It's unbecoming, Thomas. You should accept Sophie's choice." Choice. The word felt like mockery. Sophie hadn't chosen freely. She'd been cornered by grief, by promises whispered in her weakest hours. I forced a smile. I just needed air. It's been a long day. Evelyn's gaze swept over me, lingering on my phone. "Careful what you chase in the dark. You might not like what you find." With that, she turned on her heel, Richard following, their polished shoes echoing down the hall. Ethan exhaled sharply. "They know." "Let them," I said, though my hands trembled. Later that night, after the last guest had left and the ballroom lights dimmed, I drove past Evelyn's estate. The house loomed like a fortress, every window lit, guards of wealth and pride. I parked down the road, engine off, heart hammering. "We shouldn't," Ethan whispered. "We have to," I replied. "If those papers exist, they'll tie Adrian to more than Sophie's fortune. They'll prove intent." We crept through the hedges, the moonlight silvering the manicured lawns. A single lamp glowed in the study window. Inside, I glimpsed Evelyn bent over a desk, Richard pacing behind her, and Adrian, still in his tuxedo, stood with them, gesturing sharply toward a stack of papers. The sight twisted my stomach. This wasn't just a family squabble, it was collusion. A plan. Ethan and I crouched lower. Through the glass, I caught fragments of their conversation. "Needs his signature before the weekends." Evelyn's voice clipped. "She's fragile, he'll guide her." Adrian, smooth as oil. "Rourke estate, transfer of trusteeship." Richard, cold, practical. Every word was a dagger. They weren't just targeting Sophie. They were dismantling what little remained of her parents' legacy, and plotting to erase me from the picture. Then Adrian turned suddenly, as if sensing eyes on him. I ducked, breath trapped in my lungs. The curtain swished closed a moment later, sealing. "Their treachery in velvet," Ethan whispered. "We need evidence, not guesses. If we break in—" "No," I cut him off. "That's what they'd expect. They'd spin it, make me the villain. We wait, we watch, and when the moment comes, we take them down on their stage." As we slipped back to the car, my phone buzzed. Again. "They know you're watching. Be careful. Midnight will change everything." The words glowed against the dark, and I knew this wasn't paranoia anymore. Whoever was feeding me these texts was inside their circle, or close enough to hear their whispers. Back home, the silence was heavier than ever. I poured a glass of water, stared at it as though it might betray me, then left it untouched on the counter. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. I sat in the dark, waiting for dawn, and when it came, it brought no peace, only Sophie's voice, trembling on the other end of the phone. "Uncle Thomas," she whispered. "I need to see you alone, please." Her words cracked under the weight of fear, and I realized the wedding hadn't ended, it had only just begun. The cafe where Sophie asked to meet was nearly empty, the kind of place where chipped mugs outnumbered customers, and the hum of the refrigerator drowned out most conversation. She sat in a corner booth, veil discarded, her hair pinned messily, as though she'd torn herself out of the bridal portrait. When she looked up at me, I saw none of the glow a bride should carry. Just exhaustion, and a fear so raw it made my chest ache. "Uncle Thomas," she whispered. "I don't know what to do." I slid into the booth, blocking her from view. "Start with the truth." Her hands trembled around the coffee cup. "Adrian, he's not who everyone thinks he is." The words came haltingly at first, then spilled faster, a dam cracking. She confessed that since the accident, Adrian had been her constant shadow. Helpful at first, arranging funeral details, fielding calls, making himself indispensable. But over time, his concern had curdled into control. He dictated which friends she could see, handled all correspondence about her parents' estate, and convinced her family that she was too fragile to manage on her own. I kept telling myself, "He loved me," Sophie said, her voice breaking. That grief was making me imagine things, but the more I tried to breathe, the more he tightened his grip. I swallowed hard. "And Evelyn and Richard?" Her eyes darkened. "They encouraged it. They said Adrian was steady, reliable, that I should lean on him. But sometimes I caught them talking behind closed doors, their voices sharp. And when I entered, they'd smile like nothing was wrong." She pulled a folded paper from her clutch and slid it across the table. My heart hammered as I opened it. It was a copy of a legal draft, transfer of Rourke estate holdings into joint trust. Adrian Cross, trustee. "They told me I should sign it once we returned from the honeymoon," Sophie said. Tears gathered in her eyes. I didn't want to, but they kept saying I'd be overwhelmed without help, that it was only temporary. Temporary, a word that never means what it promises. I clenched my fists. "You're not signing anything. Not now. Not ever." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "But what if they don't give me a choice?" The question chilled me, because I knew Adrian, Evelyn, and Richard weren't simply scheming for signatures. They were playing a longer, darker game. I reached across the table, covering her shaking. Hands with mine. "Sophie, you're not alone. I'll protect you, but we need proof, solid proof." As if summoned by my words, the bell over the cafe door jingled. Ethan walked in, his expression grim. He slid into the booth beside me, pulling out his phone. "I've been digging," he said without preamble. He showed us a string of photographs, Adrian in a downtown office with a man I recognized from the estate study window. Meetings at odd hours, cash envelopes exchanged. And then one photo that made Sophie gasp. Adrian and Evelyn together at a notary office, papers spread across the table. "They're not even hiding it anymore," Ethan muttered. "They're setting everything up so that once Sophie signs, it all transfers cleanly. Adrian gets control, and Evelyn ensures the family's fortune stays in their bloodline. Without you in the picture, Thomas." I felt the blood drain from my face. And if Sophie refuses, Ethan's silence was answer enough. Sophie's eyes brimmed with tears. I thought I'd lost everything when Mom and Dad died. Now I feel like I'm about to lose myself. No, I said fiercely. You're stronger than they think, and we're not letting them win. Ethan leaned in. Then we need to set a trap, something undeniable. Catch them admitting it. The idea hardened inside me like steel. Hank's words, from the night before, echoed. Let them think their plan is working. I turned back to Sophie. We'll play along. Let Adrian believe you're wavering. If he thinks victory is close, he'll slip, and when he does, we'll be ready. Her lips parted in fear. And if I can't pretend well enough? I squeezed her hand. You'll have us. You're not carrying this alone. We left the cafe separately, careful not to be seen together. But even with that precaution, my phone buzzed before I reached the car. She told you, didn't she? Careful, Thomas. She's not safe as long as you're meddling. My chest tightened. They were watching. They knew everything. That night, Hank studied the draft trust document under the harsh light of his workbench lamp. His jaw was granite. This is it, he said. The smoking gun. We just need them to admit what it's for. So, how do we force their hand? I asked. He slid a tiny recorder across the table, its surface scratched but reliable. You give them what they want. You let them think Sophie's ready to sign. I'll be nearby with Ethan, ready to record everything. And when the moment comes, we'll bring in the law. The plan made my stomach churn. It required Sophie to walk willingly into the lion's den, pretending submission while predators sharpened their teeth. But she nodded, determination hardening her face. I won't let them steal Mom and Dad's legacy, she said. If I have to lie to Adrian to protect it, I will. My throat tightened with pride and fear. She was still so young, yet braver than most grown men I'd known. 2 days later, the stage was set. Evelyn invited us to her estate under the pretense of family reconciliation. Adrian greeted us at the door, his charm of veneer stretched thin. Sophie clung to my arm, pale but steady. In the study, Richard laid the trust document on the desk. Evelyn smiled sweetly. All that's needed now is Sophie's signature. Just one pen stroke, darling, and your future will be secure. Adrian placed a pen in her hand. Do it, love, he whispered. It's for the best. Sophie's hand trembled above the page. I felt every muscle in my body coil, ready to leap between her and the trap. And then, in the silence of that moment, I caught a sound. The faint, blessed click of Hank's recorder hidden beneath the bookshelf. The net was tightening, but whether it would hold or snap depended on what Sophie did next. The pen hovered over the paper like a blade suspended above a throat. Sophie's hand shook so violently, I feared the nib would tear straight through the page. Evelyn leaned closer, her smile tight, her perfume sharp as vinegar. Go on, darling, she urged softly. This is just a formality. Your parents would have wanted stability. Her words were honeyed, but every syllable was poisoned. Richard stood behind her, arms folded, eyes locked on Sophie like a hawk waiting for prey to falter. Adrian's hand lingered on Sophie's shoulder, his thumb pressing into her skin with the casual cruelty of ownership. I forced myself to stay still, to let the scene play out. Hank's warning echoed. Let them believe she's giving in. That's when they'll reveal themselves. Sophie drew a trembling breath. I don't know if I can. Evelyn's smile wavered, just for a moment, before she recovered. Of course you can, sweetheart. Think of all the burdens this will lift from you. Adrian will handle everything. You won't have to worry anymore. I saw Adrian's jaw twitch. His patience was fraying. Sophie, he said, his voice low. Urgent. Don't embarrass us. Sign it now. Her eyes flicked to me. For one heartbeat, the whole room froze, and then she whispered, maybe tomorrow. The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard's nostrils flared. Evelyn's smile curdled into something cold. And Adrian slammed his fist against the desk, making the pen jump. You're wasting everyone's time. he snapped. How long are you going to keep pretending? You're in control? I rose slowly, forcing calm into every movement. That's enough, but Evelyn cut me off, her voice sharp. Thomas, you've poisoned her against us. You've always been the meddler. First you filled her head with doubts, and now you stand in the way of what's best for this family. The hypocrisy of it almost made me laugh. Best for the family? They weren't family, they were predators. Sophie shoved the pen back across the desk, her voice breaking. I won't sign. The mask shattered. Adrian's face twisted, fury and something darker flashing in his eyes. Then maybe we'll have to find another way to make you. The words hung like smoke. Richard's hand slipped into his jacket pocket and instinct roared through me. Don't! I barked, stepping forward. For a moment I thought he might draw a weapon, but instead, he pulled out a slim folder, slamming it on the desk. We have other drafts, other documents. Don't think you can stop what's already in motion. Hank's voice crackled faintly in my earpiece, barely audible through the tiny mic he'd insisted I wear. We've got them on tape. Keep them talking. Steadied my breath. In motion? You mean this was never about Sophie's well-being? It's about control. About the estate? Evelyn sneered. Of course it is. Do you think we'd let a grieving child squander everything Michael and Laura built? She's weak, fragile. She needs guidance. Guidance? My voice rose. You mean ownership? Adrian leaned across the desk, his voice venom. You don't understand, Thomas. Sophie owes me. I saved her when she had no one. Without me, she's nothing. Sophie's voice cracked like a whip. I'm not nothing, and I don't owe you my life. For the first time, Adrian flinched, but the fury came back twice as strong. You'll regret this. Hank's voice again, sharper this time. That's enough. Pull her out. We have what we need. I moved to Sophie's side, my hand firm on her shoulder. We're done here. Evelyn's face twisted. If you walk out that door, Thomas, you'll regret it. You can't protect her forever. I met her glare with steel. Watch me. We turned to leave, but Richard stepped into the doorway, blocking our path. His smile was thin, dangerous. You're not going anywhere until she signs. My heart hammered, but before I could react, footsteps thundered in the hall. The study door burst open and Hank entered, Ethan right behind him. Hank's presence filled the room like a storm cloud, his voice a growl. Step aside. Richard froze, caught off guard. Ethan lifted his phone, camera app recording, its red dot blinking. We've got everything, he said. Every word, every threat. Adrian's face drained of color. Evelyn stammered, You can't use that, it won't hold up. Oh, it'll hold, Hank said coldly. Blackmail, coercion, fraud, attempted extortion of an estate. You've written your own confession. For the first time, I saw fear crack through Evelyn's mask. But Richard wasn't finished. He lunged toward Ethan, reaching for the phone. Intercepted him, shoving him back against the desk. Years of suppressed fury surged through me, every ounce of grief and rage finding its outlet. Touch him and I'll bury you myself, I growled. Richard froze, breath heaving. Sophie gripped my arm. Uncle, please, let's just go. I pulled her close, guiding her toward the door. Hank and Ethan flanked us, their presence a wall of protection. We made it out of the study, down the hall, and into the night air before anyone dared follow. But as we climbed into Hank's truck, my phone buzzed again. A message lit the screen. This isn't over. She will be mine, one way or another, Adrian's words. My blood ran cold, and I knew with a certainty that cut to the bone that the real fight had only just begun. Midnight draped the town in silence, but my pulse pounded so loudly I swore it would wake the dead. Hank's truck rattled down the back roads, Ethan in the passenger seat, me and Sophie crammed into the back. None of us spoke. The glow of the dashboard painted Hank's jaw in hard lines, the set of a man who'd seen too much and wasn't about to let history repeat itself. Sophie leaned against me, her face pale but her voice steady. Uncle Thomas, what if they come after me next? They already tried, I said, my hand tightening around hers. But they won't succeed. Not while I'm breathing. Her eyes shimmered, wide with a trust that both warmed and terrified. Me, because trust was fragile, and one mistake on my part could shatter it forever. When we reached Hank's farmhouse, he killed the engine and turned in his seat. We can't stay reactive anymore. They've escalated. Adrian's message proves it. This isn't about inheritance alone. It's possession. Control. If he can't bind her with a signature, he'll try something worse. Ethan pulled out his phone, the screen glowing against the dark. I've got recordings from tonight. Evelyn, Richard, even Adrian, they all hung themselves with their own words. We need to hand this over to the authorities. Not yet, Hank said. His voice was like gravel. Cops will bury this under procedure. We need undeniable evidence, something they can't spin. I felt Sophie shiver beside me. What if they don't wait? What if they do something before we're ready? Hank's gaze softened for just a moment. That's why you're staying here. This place is off the grid. They won't think to. Look. But I knew Adrian's obsession. His text hadn't been a bluff. He wouldn't sleep until he had Sophie back under his thumb. That night, after Sophie drifted into an uneasy sleep in the guest room, Ethan and I sat with Hank in the dim light of the kitchen. A pot of coffee sat untouched between us. None of us trusted it anymore. Hank laid out the plan, cameras hidden at the farmhouse, audio recorders in every room, a spare truck fueled and ready. We make them come to us, he said. They're desperate. Desperation makes people sloppy. Sloppy means they'll hand us the rope to hang them. I nodded, but unease gnawed at me. And if sloppy means dangerous? Hank's eyes met mine. Then we meet danger head on. Ethan leaned forward, his voice low. They'll come. And when they do, they'll come hard. You need to be ready for that. I thought of Adrian's face in the study, twisted with rage, his hand crushing Sophie's shoulder. The memory made my jaw tighten. I'm ready. The next 2 days passed in a blur of tension. Sophie rarely left her room, but when she did, I saw the steel growing in her eyes. She wasn't the same girl who had walked into that engagement party weeks ago. Grief had carved something sharper in her, something stronger, but fear lingered too. Each night she startled at shadows. Each creak of the old farmhouse made her flinch. On the third night, just as the clock struck midnight, Hank's motion sensor lit up the monitor in the kitchen. Headlights cut across the gravel drive. They're here, Hank said flatly. Sophie appeared in the doorway, pale in her nightdress. Uncle, stay in your room, I told her, no matter what you hear. Ethan checked his phone, recording already rolling. This is it. We moved to the living room. Hank dimmed the lights, positioning us where the cameras would catch everything. The knock on the door came, polite and sharp. I opened it. Adrian stood there, flanked by Evelyn and Richard. His suit was immaculate, his tie knotted tight, as though this were some polite social call instead of a midnight invasion. Thomas, he said smoothly, we need to talk. You've done enough talking, I replied. Evelyn's eyes darted past me, searching. Where's Sophie? We've come to help her. She needs family, not isolation. Funny, I said, my voice sharp. That family feels like a prison when you're the one building the walls. Adrian's smile curdled. Step aside. Not a chance. He leaned closer, his whisper sharp as glass. You think you've won because you stalled her hand, but you can't protect her forever. She's mine, Thomas, she knows it. And the longer you stand in the way, the uglier this gets. Behind me, Hank's camera blinked. Every word recorded. You're done, I said quietly. We've got your threats, your coercion, everything you tried to hide. It's over. Adrian's composure cracked. His hand shot out, gripping my collar. It's over when I say it's over. And then Sophie's voice rang out from the hallway. Strong, clear. No, Adrian, it's over now. She stood in the doorway, chin high, eyes blazing. For the first time, I saw not just my niece, but a woman standing on her own ground. Adrian's grip faltered. Evelyn gasped. Richard swore under his breath. The room hung frozen for a single electric heartbeat, and then Hank's phone buzzed on the table. One word flashed on the screen. Police. Blue lights flared against the windows. Adrian's eyes widened, his fingers slipping from my collar. Evelyn hissed, "What have you done?" But before I could answer, the door burst open. Officers stormed, voices loud, commanding. Adrian, Evelyn, and Richard froze, caught in the blinding light, and Sophie whispered the words that broke the spell. "You'll never control me again." The living room exploded into chaos. Shouts from officers, the scrape of boots on wood, the cold flash of metal as cuffs snapped shut. Adrian twisted, his polished shoes scuffing the floor as two officers forced him down. His face, once smug and composed, now contorted with fury. "This is a mistake," he bellowed, spit flying. "You don't know who I am. I have rights." "Yeah," Hank muttered from the corner, arms folded. "And you've got the right to remain silent." Richard tried to backpedal, hands raised. "We were only here to save it for the judge," one officer barked, shoving him toward the door. Evelyn's shrill protests filled the air as another officer seized her arm. "This is a family matter. You can't, Thomas, tell them. We were just trying to help Sophie." But Sophie stepped forward before I could. She was trembling, but her voice cut sharp as a blade. "Help me? You tried to sell me. You let him put poison in my uncle's cup, and you dared call it family." Her words silenced the room. For a moment, all I heard was the click of cuffs and the heavy breathing of people caught in the act. Adrian lunged one last time, straining, against the officers. His eyes locked on Sophie, wild and desperate. "You think you're free of me? You'll regret this, Sophie. You're nothing without—" "Enough," I said, stepping between them. My voice wasn't loud, but it was final. "You've taken enough from this family. Tonight it ends." The officers dragged him toward the porch, his threats fading into the night. Evelyn and Richard followed, their fine clothes rumpled, their faces gray with fear. The sound of police radios crackled through the still air. Then the door shut, and the silence that followed was like a blessing. Sophie swayed, her breath shuddering. I caught her before she fell, holding her tight against me. "It's over," I whispered. "He can't touch you now." She buried her face in my shoulder. I thought I'd have to marry him just to keep everything from collapsing." "You don't have to sacrifice yourself to save anyone," I told her. "Not anymore." Behind us, Hank exhaled, long and heavy, like a man setting down a burden he'd carried for too many years. Ethan slipped his phone into his pocket, evidence already saved to the cloud. "They won't wriggle out of this one," he said. "Not with the recordings, the texts, the threats. The DA will eat this case alive." For the first time in months, I let myself believe it. The next few days blurred into interviews, statements, paperwork. Hank's cameras and recorders had captured everything. The coercion, the threats, Adrian's confession. The case was airtight. When the trial came, I sat in the front row beside Sophie. Adrian wore an orange jumpsuit instead of a tailored suit. Evelyn and Richard looked like withered ghosts, stripped of the arrogance that had once wrapped them like armor. The prosecutor played the recordings. Adrian's voice echoed through the courtroom. "She's mine, Thomas. She knows it." Evelyn's hiss. "If you resist, you'll make everything harder on yourself." Richard's cold assurance. "Sign the papers. End the suffering." Each word sealed their fate. The jury didn't take long. Guilty, on charges of attempted coercion, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Adrian's sentence was the longest, but Evelyn and Richard weren't spared either. They were led away, heads bowed, their empire of lies crumbling to dust. When the gavel fell, Sophie squeezed my hand so tightly it hurt. "They can't hurt us anymore," she whispered. "No," I said, tears pricking my eyes. "They can't." Afterward, life didn't snap back to normal. Couldn't. Grief still hung in the corners of our lives like stubborn cobwebs. Sophie still woke some nights crying for her parents. I still walked past their photographs and felt the sharp ache of absence. But healing began in small steps. Sophie moved into my house, her laughter slowly returning. Shy at first, then bolder. Ethan dropped by, often helping her with the charity project her mother had started before she died. Hank, gruff as ever, taught her how to change a tire and how to spot when someone was lying. Little by little, she rebuilt her world, and I rebuilt mine alongside hers. One evening, months later, we stood outside together watching the sun sink low, painting the sky in gold and crimson. Sophie leaned her head against my arm. "Uncle?" "Thomas, yeah? Thank you. For not giving up on me, for fighting when I couldn't." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "That's what family does. That's what your parents would have wanted me to do." Her smile was small, but it was real. "I think they'd be proud of us," the cicadas sang. The air smelled of summer grass, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever. Peace. I glanced at Sophie, stronger. Now, no longer the girl who had been cornered by grief and manipulation. She was her mother's daughter, resilient, fierce, and free. And as the last light of the day slipped over the horizon, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Adrian Cross had underestimated us. He had thought fear would bind us. But it was love and the unbreakable will to protect it that had set us free.